天理之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Without further ado, let's get back to Tao Te Ching chapter 1 and continue our discussion. First, a quick recap of what we have talked about before. The chapter title for chapter 1 is translated as Observe the Essence. 观妙章. The three characters translate literally. The first character is the character for observation, or as a verb, to observe. It is specifically a detached observation with no expectations, no agenda, no preconceptions. An observation from a state free of desires. Due to the desireless nature of such observation, one is able to perceive the essence of the Tao, essence of people, essence in all things. There are profound implications arising from this concept that we will be able to explore more fully today. This is how the chapter looks. The very first chapter or verse of the Tao Te Ching is relatively short, at only 9 lines, but they are very profound. Our first step in the analysis is to break it down into multiple sections. Here's the result of that sectional analysis. What we have done, as always, is that we look to repeating characters to perceive or detect the sectional breaks. With this slide, you can see at a glance how the divisions were identified. You can look at the Chinese side to the left and see the characters that repeat from line to line, indicating a poetic structure. Or you can look at the English side to the right and see how those repeating characters are translated the same way, again, indicating a poetic structure. Last time, we were able to discuss lines 1 to 4. So the first half, the first part of Tao Te Ching chapter 1 has a couple of really important points associated with that. So for instance, we talked about the character Chang, which appears in the first 2 lines, the next to last character in the first 2 lines. We talked about how when the Tao Te Ching was first written 2,500 years ago, that character was actually Heng, meaning eternal. So that is why it's translated that way. We also talked about the meaning of that famous first line. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. So a couple of hurdles that we were able to overcome in that discussion. The first one being that it is not at all clear to many that the first line is speaking to the Tao that can be expressed with spoken words. There are all kinds of translations of that, and I made a point to distinguish among them to say that it really is about the Tao explained in spoken words. Then the second hurdle was on what that means. Even if you get the correct translation, correct interpretation is just as important. So that is the reason why we had this specific slide focusing on the many interpretations out there to single out the better interpretation, the signal instead of the noise, the wheat and not the chaff. So many different ways to misunderstand that first line. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. It actually does not mean that we should not talk about the Tao. In fact, at the very end of our discussion today, I'm going to make it a point to talk about the very opposite. We should talk about the Tao. Although the spoken Tao is not the eternal Tao, it arises from the Tao because we are using human intelligence to understand the Tao at our level best. When we do that, utilize human intelligence, we are utilizing a gift from nature, or in other words, a gift from the Tao itself. Therefore, talking about the Tao does not mean that you don't get it. It means you want to understand it better. This line, the first line, is not a paradox. It is not an expression in humility. It's not meant to be Taoist humor. It's not meant to be a joke. Although there are still people who say that is the case as a very glib interpretation of the Tao Te Ching. In reality, this is a statement of how things actually work in the world. It is true that words can never describe anything completely, and yet everything has a way about it. There is a Tao of everything. It's just that the Tao, for whatever that is, can never be fully described with words. The only way to really get it is to experience it, to live it, feel it, use it, apply it, put it into daily practice. In the verbiage of popular science fiction, one must feel the force. In the same way, one must feel the Tao. Now, this wisdom can be further understood by comparing with other sources. We can understand it better by noting that there are other famous sages throughout history that have ended up with the same insight. So one such sage was the sage of the Sakya Mountains, or the Buddha Sakyamuni. That's the original Buddha, the founder of Buddhism. What he taught was recorded in the Diamond Sutra, as we spoke of last time. In that sutra, the conversation he had with his disciples was recorded, and he specifically addressed his senior disciple, whose name was Subhuti. So he talked to Subhuti, and last time I translated the passage for you. Specifically, he, speaking to Subhuti, made the point that do not say that I, the Buddha, think that I have taught Dharma. Don't say it, don't even think it. So he was very adamant about that. He was very emphatic. He really did not want anyone to have that impression, the impression that he was teaching the Dharma. This would seem puzzling unless you understand what Lao Tzu said. Furthermore, the Buddha said, if you say that about me, if you say or think that I have taught the Buddha, that I have taught the Dharma, then you slander the Buddha. So this was very serious. He regarded this as something that verged on insult, slandering the Buddha, just by saying something that people thought was positive, that the Buddha taught the Dharma. Surely people would agree with that, right? No, not the Buddha himself. The Buddha specifically said, for the one who teaches Dharma, no Dharma can be taught. And that is why we call it teaching the Dharma. He was trying to say, in his way, that the Dharma that can be taught is not the true Dharma. This is an exact equivalent to the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The expression may be different, but by understanding the point made by Lao Tzu, we can recognize that the wisdom is exactly one and the same. They can be from different sources. That is okay, because regardless of source, we're all using human intelligence and wisdom to comprehend that which is ineffable. The great spiritual truths, when you come right down to it, they come from the same source. We happen to call that source the Tao. If others prefer to call it Dharma, that's perfectly fine. So that insight gave us a great deal of confidence that we are on the right track with the interpretation that we have discussed about the Tao. So the last point that we got to can be summarized in this particular slide. And this is for the second section. So line 3 of the Tao Te Ching talks about the nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. And line 4 talked about the named is the mother of myriad things. And I pointed out specifically that there are two interpretations that persist even today. That difference in interpretation results from where you put the pause in that line. Should the pause be after the first or second character? Please note, this is not so much a translation issue, because the disagreement is among Chinese scholars themselves who are able to read the original just as I can. So the most important point that we talked about last time was about how to figure out which one is correct. And I have encircled the first interpretation, the nameless, that for multiple reasons that I feel are extremely compelling, the first interpretation is the correct interpretation. 无名, the nameless, is a concept, an important concept in the Tao. This is the first appearance of that concept. And when we talk about this, I also want to point out that there are different levels for us to master the Tao Te Ching, particularly here in the West. At the lowest level of understanding or mastery, most readers assume that an author must be an expert of the Tao Te Ching. This is the level of casual interest, the dabblers. When you go up a level, which is where I think most of us are in this gathering, you begin to see the errors of the lowest level, because you discover through study that many Western authors actually don't know the original text. That's why they have to learn the meaning second-handed. For that reason, the authors who know the original have an advantage. This is therefore the level of serious interest. Let me also note that there are many who reach this level but then go no further. So I want to point out to everyone that this is not the ultimate level for a specific reason. That even when the author knows the original, it is still important for that author to be able to explain and make logical sense of a particular interpretation. No one is exempt from this requirement, the requirement to use reasoning, regardless of background, regardless of title, regardless of position or credentials. We must always look to reasoning and the truth. So I think this is the level that you and me, all of us, should aspire to. It is the level beyond cultural bias. Then we ended up on this slide. This slide shows the named and nameless as a complementary yin and yang duality. To approach this complementary duality, one way to think of it is that the named would be the tangible things in life, and the nameless would be the intangibles. Because you see, we name things that we can touch and interact with, whereas we don't always have names for things we cannot see or touch, like feelings and emotions. Another way to approach it is to think of the physical and the metaphysical. We study the physical universe. In the course of that study, we categorize everything. We create entire disciplines in science. Astronomy, biology, chemistry, geology, and so on. We can't quite do the same thing with the metaphysical. In the metaphysical realm, we can't put anything under a microscope to scrutinize. We can't dissect things like feelings, premonitions, intuition, hunch. We can only experience But yes, we can learn from them, just as we can learn from the physical realm. So in this slide, you will see, as we have seen last time, that the named is about the myriad things in the material world. It's about the physical manifestations in the physical universe. I make those points separate because manifestations may not be living things, but we still can perceive them, we can analyze them. So it's everything that we can perceive with the physical senses. At the same time, the nameless, being the metaphysical, would be potentialities, possibilities. We're talking about the metaphysical aspect of reality. It is ultimately empty, but it is not nothingness. It is the void, the empty essence of existence that is full of potentialities and possibilities. This is what we ended up last time. And I think now we are ready to go forward into the next line, the next section, and that's going to start with line 5. So after the recap from the last time, this is a new area to explore. Line 5 says, thus, constantly without desire, one observes its essence. The first English word, thus, corresponds to the first Chinese character there, gu. Now, another character that's important is the character that I have highlighted. You can see that it's repeated in line 5 and line 6. This is the character yu, and it means desire, desires, plural, when it is used as a noun. It can also be used as a verb, to desire, desiring, etc. In this context, yu specifically refers to excessive materialistic desires. Desires that we all experience from day to day. Everyone experiences desires and multitude of desires covering every aspect of life. Now, when we talk about yu, desires, it may seem as if Laozi is speaking against excessive materialistic desires. And that is the safe interpretation that many people will stop at. We want to go beyond it. We want to go further. When we talk about desires, we are, of course, talking about desires in general. Therefore, materialistic desires don't really cover all possible desires. As an example, when we have a wish to understand something, that is a desire to learn more. When we want to calm down, slow down, that is a desire for calmness. The desire for calmness is distinctly different from a materialistic desire for goods, for monetary value, etc. They are, however, quite different from excessive lust and greed. So now you begin to see the approach from the Tao perspective on desires in general. The Tao is not about being against certain things, including desires. Rather, the Tao is about gaining clarity to be clear about desires. It's not about opposition against anything. Clarity on desires in many cases, will lead you to reduce desires. So in that sense, it can be the opposite or the opposition. But in other cases, for instance, in the case of apathy, when one doesn't feel like doing anything and therefore miss out on the joy of living, you would actually want to moderate the desire to the appropriate level in order to enjoy life. So there's a lot more about that we'll get into. For now, though, I need to point out another important character, and that's the character Guan. When you look at the translation for these two lines, you note the word observe, whether it's observe the essence or observe the manifestations. So the meaning of Guan is to observe, to watch. When we say observe the manifestations, Lao Tzu is basically saying you can observe at the surface level. When we say observe the essence, Lao Tzu is saying you can go beyond the surface level. This applies to our observation of everything and everyone, our observation of the world around us. So let's take a look. This is linking observation to the level of desires. How so? When you have a state of being desireless, the desireless state leads to one's ability to observe essence and gain insights. To gain greater understanding, insights meaning the internal view, the insider's perspective, this is the way to mastery. We all have this experience in life. That is, when you're not involved in the thick of it, when you're not so heavily engaged that you cannot perceive it accurately, when you are taking a step back, looking at it from a mental vantage point, that is when you have a clearer view. We have all experienced this through the course of living our lives. So, less desires, greater clarity. Conversely, the desiring state leads to observing surface level appearance, not going beyond the surface appearance. To observe manifestations means to have this sensory impression in the material world. Unlike the insights of the state free of desires, the state full of desires is the shallow view, the superficial understanding of something. This is how marketing works. In advertising, in promotion, you present a dazzling surface appearance. Indeed, that is what most people are attracted to. And if the marketing campaign is really good, people will often overlook considerations about substance, about quality, durability, functionality. The only thought at the surface level is that this thing being promoted could be anything. It'll make me look good. So the bottom line is this: desires have an obscuring effect on perception. We have all experienced this in our lives. So now we can tie it together. Constantly without desire, one observes its essence. Here's a metaphor that is used by both the Tao tradition and the Zen tradition. Desires are like the clouds at night that can obscure the moon. Let me explain. start with the Tao tradition. In the Tao, we have travel-based metaphors, many of them. They show up many times in the Tao, like the journey of 1,000 miles. That is a travel-based metaphor. The Zen tradition, from its Buddhist roots, uses the heavenly glory of the moon to represent Dharma, or great spiritual truths. When the Buddha said, "Do not be mistaken in thinking or saying that I have taught Dharma," what he is really saying is that when I teach Dharma, it is as if I am using a finger to point at the moon. I'm pointing to the moon to get everybody to look at the heavenly glory of the moon, symbolizing the Dharmic truth. And then the Buddha made the point that do not mistake my finger for the moon. Do not keep staring at my finger. Look at the moon. Don't get it mixed up. So here, combining the moon with the travel metaphor, you get this beautiful synthesis of travelers moving about at night, going along a moonlit road. So what happens to this nighttime traveler? Well, when the clouds dissipate, when they are not obscuring the moon, you have the state that is free of desires. And this is like the bright moon illuminating the road, which allows safe travels at night. You can see where you're going. In life, this is the same as saying that as you are going through life, there's a situation and you are perceiving that situation clearly because you are able to look at it from a detached perspective, a state that is free of excessive materialistic desires. That's how we pull it all together. Because you are able to see that, you have insights. Your insights will tell you the best way to handle the situation. You know how to approach and resolve the situation in accordance with the Tao, based on the Tao. Now, what about the flip side of the coin? We can go from the desireless to the desiring. So the flip side of this metaphor is what happens when dark clouds roll in at night and block the illumination from the moon. It says, line 6 says, constantly with desire, one observes its manifestations. Let's break it down. When dark clouds block the moon, you have the desiring state. The lack of illumination plunges everything into darkness. Observing the manifestation means you can see just what's immediately in front of you. You don't have the insight to look further down the road. We're not able to see clearly. We may end up taking a wrong turn because of that lack of illumination. In life, this is equivalent to you perceiving only the surface level of a situation. Now, because of that, you can be misled into making a wrong decision. You can worsen the situation by not knowing exactly what to do and not be guided by the illumination of the truth. And this is how powerfully materialistic desires can mislead us. As I said, this is all about marketing and advertising. Not being able to see further down the road due to darkness means there are mental blind spots. And no matter what you're trying to accomplish, by desiring too much, you end up tripping over yourself. We have all seen this as well in our lives. We have seen it in other people, our friends, and chances are we have all seen it from firsthand personal experience. Simply put, materialistic desires get in the way. We have to figure out a better way to moderate or transcend desires, to manage them skillfully. So now, having seen this complementary duality between having desires and being free of desires, this complementary duality of essence and manifestation, we can now summarize it with a layout that is similar to what you have seen before when we compared the named with the nameless. So this is a review and a summary. The desiring and the desireless states form a complementary duality of yin and yang. On the desiring side, we've got constantly with desires, one can observe the manifestation. Then on the other side, constantly without desires, one observes its essence. Let's cover the left-hand side, the desiring state. So what are we talking about here? We're saying materialistic desires will naturally limit you to a materialistic view. Of course. And as we have seen, that obscured view can take you down the wrong path. You cannot look past the surface level of a situation, and in the travel metaphor, it just means you cannot see very far. You trip over yourself due to the mental blind spot. So what about the desireless side of the equation? The desireless state. This is about transcending desires, which enables detached observations. It is like pulling back the curtain to see the machinery that operates the Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is impressive, imposing, dominating. But when you pull back the curtain to see the machinery that makes it work, that clarity gives you the insight. Suddenly, there's not the fear of the unknown because you can see exactly what it is doing. So when you utilize that in life, it is actually the secret of Wu Wei, unattached actions, unattached observations. It lets you see personal agendas and hidden motives. This is how Tao masters are able to discern the truth of a situation. And when you are able to see that, it means you can act minimally. You can do just what is needed to achieve optimal results. Oftentimes, a real master of the Tao can be seen doing something that seems little, not very much, and yet achieving tremendous results. Now, let me emphasize at this point that Guan, observation, is one of the most important, most central concepts in Eastern thought, not just the Tao. This doesn't come up a lot in the Western study of the Tao. Usually, people read about Wu Wei and perhaps Pu, the principle of simplicity and plainness, but most of the time, they're not exposed to Guan despite its importance. It has not been popularized. Now, I said that is not just in the Tao, but Eastern thoughts in general. That is very true. In the Chinese practice of Buddhism, the Bodhisattva, a being of wisdom and compassion, the Bodhisattva is known as Guan Yin. Two characters. Guan is the same character we're looking at, to observe. Yin means sound. Together, Guan Yin means one who observes or keeps watch on the sound of suffering in the world out of pure compassion. So I mentioned that just to underscore the importance of Guan in Eastern thought in general, not just the Tao. In the Tao, there are additional in-depth thoughts on this concept, and they become especially prominent when the Tao is combined with Buddhist teachings. This is readily seen in the Qing Jing, something that I address specifically in my book, The Tao of Tranquility. It is in chapter 5. The Qing Jing, of course, was written to be the fusion between the two wisdom traditions. Let me show you what it looks like. Here is verse 5 of the Qing Jing. You see the original to the left, the English to the right. These will demonstrate a connection between desires and observations, just like we're talking about in the Tao Te Ching, from a slightly different angle. In the Qing Jing, it is also not about the elimination of desires. The specific term in the Qing Jing to transcend desires is to dispel them. And that means to manage and moderate desires so they don't control you. You control them for your own benefit. The Qing Jing goes into greater details on the clarity of perception when you are able to observe with this clarity of the spirit. The first point that it makes is observe their minds internally, and there is no mind with their minds. This is applying observation, guan, to one's mind. The idea is that when you are able to do that, when you are able to observe your own mind, you definitely see that your thoughts come and go. You can see there is nothing in the mind that has any permanence. Everything in the mind is transient. The thoughts that you have in your mind right now, they're all transient. None of them is permanent. So this is a true statement. Then the Qing Jing goes on to say, observe their forms externally, and there is no form with their forms. This is switching gears from observing the mind to observing the body, the external physical form. When you are able to observe from a desireless state for that clarity, the clarity shows you, makes you understand that our physical forms will go through changes as we age. In fact, our physical forms are changing in small ways now, even as we speak. The bottom line is there is simply no fixed form, nothing permanent. Everything about us, everything about the body is in transition at any one time. Then the Qing Jing goes on to make the third point. Observe their things from afar, and there is nothing with their things. This is switching gears once again from observing yourself, your mind and your body, to turn your gaze outward to the world itself. Now, people observe the surface level externally of the material world. Someone who studies the Tao can look at the world and see through it and perceive the impermanence of the world. Everything in the world is, in a real sense, illusory because they come and go. They're transient. Even things that we think of as permanent, like buildings, all of our constructions, all the constructions from human beings are built and at some point demolished. Given a long enough time frame, our buildings come and go, they don't last. What about nature? Same thing. Nature itself is undergoing constant changes, just as we are. The landscape exposed to the elements is changing even now as we speak. Nothing about that is permanent. Out of all this, our only conclusion is that the essence of everything is change. Nothing stays still. We cannot grasp onto any of it. The best thing we can do is to understand the patterns of change and move according to those patterns. This is why the I Ching is the change classic or the classic of changes. And this theme of change, constant change, and the mastery of that change is a continuing theme in the Tao Te Ching. Let us now get into the next line of the Tao Te Ching. And this is line 7. Line 7 says, these two emerge together but differ in name. It is very important for us to have a lot of clarity and understanding on exactly what these two are referring to. There are multiple complementary dualities mentioned in the previous lines. First, the desireless state versus the desiring state. 无欲, 有欲. Having desires, not having desires, this is a complementary duality. And then, observing the essence versus observing manifestations. In other words, looking at the surface level versus having the insider's perspective. That is another complementary duality. And please note, these two sub-bullets are linked. It's a meta pair of complementary dualities. So the desireless state is linked to observing the essence. The desiring state is linked to observing manifestations. Then there's the nameless versus the named. Yet another complementary duality, and we talked about how the nameless can be pointing to the intangibles or the metaphysical, whereas the named is simply what we see all around us in the material plane, in the physical universe. Then, the final complementary duality identified in the previous lines, we've got the origin of heaven and earth, or the source of universal creation, versus the mother of myriad things, or in other words, the source of life. Life from non-life. Now, these two separates are also linked. So the nameless is linked to the universal source of creation or the origin of heaven and earth. That's the Tao itself. The named is linked to the mother of myriad things, the source of life, including us. We're part of that too. So this is talking about how these are the pairs, these are the complementary dualities that emerge together but differ in name. That is, we see them as different things, we call them by different names, but they emerge together because they come from the same source. They are, in fact, one. So they appear different, they emerge from the Tao, and let's zoom in on that. Let's get a clearer focus on that to talk about exactly what Lao Tzu means when he says, well, they seem different, but they're from the same source. How exactly? First, let's talk about human beings. We possess both mind full of desires and also spirit without desires. So in human beings, ourselves included, we experience both. We have both the desiring and the desireless states. We arise from the Tao. We come from the Tao just as all life are sourced in the Tao. We're the somethingness that came out of the nothingness of the Tao. Because we're part of the natural order of things, human beings, in many respects, are no different from other living things like animals. We naturally have desires, and that, because it is part of life, comes from nature, comes from the Tao. Now, our minds, our spirituality, intelligence, wisdom, they also come from the Tao. We have human level sentience. It is therefore natural for us to seek a path of transcendence. Therefore, both the desiring states and the desireless states ultimately come from the Tao. They emerge from the same source. They are actually one. Essence is the Tao. All manifestations originate from the Tao. So essence being the Tao, it of course comes from the Tao. Oftentimes, Tao masters will say the Tao comes from itself. The Tao is dependent upon itself. Then, what about everything in the world? Well, whatever the source is, where all things originated, we call that the Tao. So everything in the world comes from the Tao. So the essence and manifestation that you see here, they have the common origin in the Tao itself. So that's pretty easy to see. Then the Tao is nameless. Names come from humans. Humans come from the Tao. So the nameless will be synonymous with the Tao itself. The Tao had always existed. It existed before there were human beings to give it a name. So its true name is no name. The named is just another way to refer to all the things that we perceive with our physical senses, the things we study and categorize. We use human level intelligence to do that. We come from the Tao. Our intelligence is a gift from nature, from the Tao. So again, It just all comes from the Tao. Finally, the Tao is the source of universal creation and the source of all life. Whether it is the myriad things, the living things that we're talking about, or the setting in which they find themselves, the world, all below heaven, everything goes back to the Tao regardless. So that's the point. When we say these two emerge together but differ in name, we see them as separate, different things, but when you trace them back far enough, they are actually the same source, the same thing. Next, let's get into line 8 and line 9. Line 8 says the unity is said to be the mystery, mystery of mysteries, the door to all wonders. So these are the crucial parts at the very end of Tao Te Ching chapter 1, and I want to approach the discussion of this by singling out this character, Xuan. So the pinyin looks a little exotic, spelled with an X, but in reality, the X sounds like SH. So Xuan, it means mystical, mysterious, difficult to understand. So here's the meaning. Mystery, mysterious, mystical. Mystery when it's used as a noun, mysterious and mystical when it is used as an adjective. Very often in the study of the Tao Te Ching, you will come across a mistranslation of dark or darkness. So mystery of mysteries gets mistranslated as the darkness of darkness. That is incorrect, but let me explain why that is. In ancient classical Chinese, it was fairly common to use this character, Xuan, for the color black, a dark color. This was a tangential definition for this character. It is derived from the primary meaning about how it is difficult to see in the pitch black of darkness at night. So the darkness of the night becomes the description of the color. Xuan goes from the darkness at night, difficult to see, to the color black, or the color of darkness. Now, the other parts of the meaning, difficult to see, in the darkness of the night, applies to concepts and ideas that are difficult to see or difficult to understand. This is just like when you and I say in regular everyday conversation, we say, oh, I see. Sometimes we say, I see what you mean. When we say that, we're not talking about the physical sense of sight. We're talking about understanding. We did not see or understand something before, but upon explanation, now I see, meaning now I comprehend, or now I understand. So this is the connection between seeing and understanding. That is the actual usage here. Not dark or darkness, not black, but difficult to see, as in understanding and comprehension. So in this context, it actually means a teaching that is difficult to understand. So Lao Tzu is saying that this is a teaching that's difficult to understand. Indeed, among the teachings that are difficult to understand, this is the most difficult of all. Because there's difficulty involved, we want to break it down and then make sure that with this very complex and profound thought, we actually can see it very clearly. Line 8 says, the unity is said to be the mystery. The unity of what? The unity of yin and yang. The unity of complementary dualities. All the things that we talked about before, the named, the nameless, the desiring state, the desireless state, all of that, there is a unity among the two halves of the yin and yang symbol. That unity is mystery, meaning the oneness of the two is a higher level teaching that is difficult to understand. So let's talk about what that means, because it is an important piece of the puzzle. So let's take a closer look. First, we can definitely identify how the conventional mind perceives yin and yang as being different. People usually will put them in different categories. People may represent them as light and darkness, good and evil. This is particularly popular in the Western culture in which we live. In the Western culture, there's an underlying current about this idea of the epic battle of good versus evil. The two sides square off. They are forever at war, at odds with one another, forever conflicting with one another, and it ends in this ultimate showdown of Armageddon. This is where the Tao cultivator will begin to see things differently from the conventional thinking, from the typical person. And this is because the Tao mind perceives not just the difference, but also the unity, because everything that originates from the Tao eventually must return to the Tao. So unity in this context is the integration of yin and yang. One important idea is that we need both in life. This is not like the Western concept of, pick and choose your side. Will you side with good or will you side with evil? And then have it out in this clash. The Tao thinking is that the two halves are both useful in their own way. In the underlying level of reality, they are actually one. Please note that when we say this oneness applies to everything, it is because yin and yang are universal concepts. All complementary dualities will fall into the same principle, the same rule. What we need in life, not just the essence, but the manifestation too. Not just the underlying reality, but the surface appearance. Not just the spiritual, but the material. We need both desireless and desiring. This makes sense because to do anything at all, we need to have a certain degree of desire. We are alive right now because we desire to continue living. We have a desire to draw the next breath. No matter what the complementary duality is, we draw from both sides. In fact, we must. Here we are at the last line of chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching. It says, mystery of mysteries, the door to all wonders. Now, the mystery of mysteries is the ultimate lesson of this verse. What Laozi is saying is that this is not just a higher level teaching, it is literally the ultimate teaching. It is the door to all wonders. So this leads to the question, why would needing both yin and yang, being with And without desires, why would that be the ultimate? Well, one reason is because it can be a difficult listen for many people. The Tao is basically saying we make use of both the desiring and the desireless states, and yet at the same time, we know there are still gurus who are telling us we must eliminate all desires, which is a completely different perspective. So here, let's talk about the unity, the union of yin and yang, the return to oneness. This is because it was the oneness of the Tao that gave rise to yin and yang. Therefore, yin and yang must ultimately return to the oneness of the Tao. It's the great circle of experience. It is also the great circle of our own personal paths in the Tao, from birth to death, arising or emerging from the Tao to the return trip, going back home to the Tao. At this level, the Tao mind is no longer about the dichotomy of positive versus negative. This is important. We need to explain what this means exactly. It is tied to the question, what shall be the transformation of Tao for me? So we'll get to that by analyzing positive versus negative. It is all about why. Let's talk about what we see or what most people perceive as negative versus positive, and then tie it together to show how they are actually one and the same. Let's start with the negative, and we can draw from life, from negative experiences that most people would agree, yeah, that's bad. I'm so sorry that happened to you. You know, that was definitely a bad thing. Lao Tzu is telling us to elevate our thinking to the next level. Now, example one, on the negative side. In life, there's been certain people who abandoned you just when you needed them most. Definitely negative. What is the other side of the coin? What is the complement in the complementary duality? You learned how to be independent and self-sufficient. From the experience, you realize that ultimately you can only count on yourself. And when you have that measure of independence and self-sufficiency, you no longer go through life fearing that people will abandon you again just when you need them the most. We have a positive. Another example, similar to the first, someone you trusted betrayed your trust. Not exactly the same, because this could be a scenario when someone you trusted with confidential information betrayed your trust by revealing that confidential information to other people. Well, that's a very negative thing. What's the complement? You learned to be more discerning in choosing truly trustworthy friends. That is, you don't trust people blindly. You don't trust people just because they tell you that they are trustworthy. You need to be much more discerning than that. That discernment is very positive. You can see how this pattern goes. Consider this. You were attacked, bullied, and mocked growing up. That is an experience, very negative shared by many of us. Experience of being bullied. So what about the positive side of it? Well, you learn to be strong so you can protect yourself. Perhaps more importantly, you learn to be able to protect other people from the bullying that you went through. That's a positive. We could go on, but let's just do one more. You stumbled and fell at one point in your journey. This is meant to be a catch-all. Other negative experiences, I can, metaphorically speaking, describe them as having stumbled in life, having fallen in life at some point. And the general positive to complement that is to say you learned to get back on your feet, to recover, to keep going. Now, looking at the two here, it becomes clear. You can't have one without the other. You can't have the positive without the negative. It is just like when we say you cannot improve yourself physically without training. People who are involved with martial arts, they know this saying, cry in the dojo, laugh on the battlefield. To laugh on the battlefield, positive, it means you are skillful and deadly. To cry in the dojo, that means the training that you go through is anything but easy. Same thing with athletic disciplines. When you go through training, that's not fun. But when you get stronger, more agile, that's great. But one doesn't happen without the other. It's just not how the world works. So I have a sketch of a Tao symbol, the yin and yang symbol below. What I'm trying to say here is that whether people see them as good or bad, negative or positive, you can see from here how they can serve you, even the negative side of life. Even the worst thing happening to you can catalyze you a transformation to turn yourself into a different and better person. So this is the mystery to master about the unity of yin and yang. At the underlying level of reality, it's actually not two, but one. Whether people see it as positive or negative, they're the same path, your path, the same journey, your journey. And just as it was in our previous example with the Buddha, Lao Tzu was not the only sage who came up with this realization. Other sages throughout history, East and West, have come upon the same wisdom, the same insight. And I want to present you with another example that is also from the Zen tradition. Of course, I want to reiterate that the Zen tradition is what happened historically when there was a fusion of Buddhist teachings and Tao teachings. This is from the Platform Sutra. The Platform Sutra is a most important classic in the Zen tradition. Toward the end of the Platform Sutra, there is a fascinating section where Huineng, the sixth patriarch, is asked to explain advanced Dharma. I have the original text to the left, and I have prepared my own translation for you on the right. As always, when I translate anything, including this, my guarantee to you is that you can match every element in the original text to the English rendition for 100% accuracy. I skip nothing. I add nothing. It's a little surprising I even have to say that, but this is a basic requirement for translation. So let's go through paragraph 1. Light and darkness. Ordinary people see them as two things, while the wise realize their nature is not two, but one. This nature of not being two is the true nature. This sounds very similar to what we have just talked about. And the most important thing to note here is the expression true nature. Specifically, Huineng was referring to the true nature of everything. Now, what he's saying is that everything includes the true nature of human beings as well, because we are, after all, part of everything. And the soul of human beings is one with the true nature of reality itself. Let's go to paragraph 2. About this true nature, Huineng further explains, this true nature is not decreased in the ignorant, nor is it increased in the sage. It is not disturbed in an agitated state, nor is it inactive in a meditative state. This is interesting. This is basically saying what we call true nature, or the soul, if you prefer. There's no distinction among people. It is not like saying that some people know more, have more knowledge than other people. Some people are smarter than other people. When it comes to the soul, it is one and the same. This is making it doubly clear that what we're talking about applies to reality, to existence, and that's why we're all included. The true nature of human beings is the same in everybody. Nobody has more or less of it. It is always with us, regardless of our current state of being. We can be active, inactive, it's there. It's ever present. That is what it's trying to express. Paragraph 3. It is not discontinued or constant. It does not arrive or depart. It is not in the middle, inside or outside. It is neither born nor extinguished. Its essence is always as it is. It is eternal and unchanging. It is called the Tao. That very last sentence may sound surprising. Is this not the Zen tradition we're talking about? Was Huineng not the patriarch of the Zen tradition in his time? Why would he be talking about the Tao and not Zen? Well, as you can see in the original text, the very last character there, that's exactly the same character as what we have in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. It's just the character for the Tao. So some translations will render it as the way. Well, it's actually the exact same thing as the Tao. A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. Changing the label doesn't change the concept you are pointing to. So yeah, he's talking about the Tao right here. Can it be all along that true nature is simply the Tao? Is that what this is telling us? Let's check. Huineng says true nature is not a physical thing and cannot be described as such. It does not arrive, it does not depart. It has no location. It is not in the middle. It is not on the inside or outside, because it is everywhere. It is nowhere and everywhere. It's ever present. It is neither born nor extinguished, meaning this true nature, the Tao, is eternal and unchanging. Yes, we're talking about the exact same thing. We're talking about the eternal Tao, using almost the exact same words as what we have already studied in chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching. Now, let me do a reality check about this concept. Is it true to life? Is it useful and practical like all other teachings we've been discussing so far? As I mentioned, in the West, many people perceive good and bad as different and separate. They see them as different things. And yet, with a bit of wisdom and a lot of experience in life, we have all seen how in the reality of everyday living, you and me and everyone else is a mixture of positive and negative. Nobody is all good or all bad. Nobody. That includes you and me. We are all complex mixtures. All we can really do, what we should do, is manage the proportion, like the yin and yang symbol. As you have already seen a couple of slides ago, no matter what it is, whether people see it as positive or negative, well, they can all serve us. It just depends on how we look at them, how we utilize them. This is exactly why Lao Tzu says yin and yang differ in name, but emerge from the same source. Now it makes sense. When we recognize this unity, this oneness of purpose, this one function of the Tao serving us, it is a powerful epiphany. You and I are meant to take it and use it. When I say you and I are meant to take it, what I mean specifically is that you and I are meant to take the path or to embark on the journey. We're meant to embark on this journey, and we're meant to do so together. Doing so together, we experience the Tao together. This is the final point Lao Tzu makes in the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching. When you do work your way to this point that Lao Tzu has made, I think you can see, as I do, it is a stunning point. Of course, that's the way it is. Of course, it cannot be any other way. This is indeed the mystery of mysteries. It's just the Tao, pure and simple. And graphically, I bring the Tao yin and yang symbol together with the symbol for the Zen. Graphically, it is shown as two, but I hope you see what I mean when I point to the graphics at the bottom and say, in fact, they are one. So this leads me to the final point in my discussion of Tao Te Ching chapter 1. In our example, just now, the sixth patriarch, Huineng and Lao Tzu, were two different individuals separated in time by more than 1,000 years. People think of them as belonging to two different traditions, the Zen tradition and the Tao tradition, They're different, they're separate. And yet, the truth they expressed were not two, but one. Ultimately, this is what we find for all great truths. They all emerge from and return to the same source, the source of human wisdom. As you have heard today, the Zen tradition talks about words as the finger pointing at the moon. We therefore realize we should not focus so much on the finger that we forget to look at the heavenly glory of the moon. The Tao tradition will state the same idea directly. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. In other words, do not focus so much on the spoken words that you miss the heavenly glory of the Tao. I think it is easy to recognize that this is exactly the same wisdom. Once again, not two, but one. The Zen tradition talks about the clouds of ignorance and desires obscuring the moon. So it is too dark at night to travel safely. When these dark clouds have parted, desires have been managed, moderated, and dispelled. You have the road illuminated so you can see ahead of you and travel under the moonlight. The Tao tradition is, as we all know, about the journey of life. As I learned from the Grand Master many years ago, it would be best to travel the journey of life with the fog lifted so you can look far ahead and enjoy the beautiful clarity of a sunny day for the next leg of your journey. These are indeed not different truths. They are one and the same. That's the reason why I have prepared this graphic for you. And I am using the expression here that you see in this slide, 万法归一. The first character there, 1, means 10,000, but the actual meaning is all. Fa, the second character, is dharma, in this case, plural. All dharmas, 万法. Gui, the third character, means return. Yi, the last character there, means one. All dharmas return to the one, meaning all wisdom have the same source. In this graphic, you will see that it combines all the elements we have discussed so far. You see a path illuminated by moonlight, the heavenly glory of the moon, unobscured by the clouds. Where does the path lead? It leads to the door. What door? The door to all wonders. This concludes our line-by-line analysis of Chapter 1. Now, let's jump to the summary of Chapter 1. Previously, we went through the first lesson of the Tao. We learned about the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, because the Tao is to be understood through living, not talking. This applies to everything because Tao is universal. Every possible activity in life works the exact same way. Then, we also talked about the Tao being the ultimate source, the source of the universe, the source of all life, and for us, personally the source of all manifestations in our lives. Those manifestations can be positive or negative. Whether they are positive or negative, they serve us. That is the purpose. That is the oneness in the function of the Tao. And therefore, it is up to us to come to grips with it and use it for our benefit. Now, let's go through the summary for what we have talked about today. The door to all wonders. First, the desireless state, the state that is free of desires, that is what leads to insights. So letting go of our various attachments, that is what will give us clarity on everything. 2, the desiring state leads to manifestations. The element of desires is always present in the material world. They're not something to be eliminated, but something to be utilized wisely. Both arise from the Tao. A lot of people will think that they are diametrically opposite, but we should see them as being actually unified. And finally, together they are the key. They are to be integrated and balanced in order for us to live the synergistic life. So everyone, what we're talking about here literally is the door to all wonders. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.